First of all, to introduce myself, I am Gabriel, one of Runway's founders. In a past life, an iOS engineer. So coming from that world, and that's true of a lot of the Runway team. And we are really excited to chat today about mobile release management and the ROI that teams stand to gain by prioritizing their mobile releases. Quick agenda. First part of the call is going to be going over briefly a report we put together based on some data that we've collected over time and over a number of mobile teams as to the ROI of prioritizing mobile release management, or as we abbreviate it, you'll see this throughout the slides, MRM. It's a topic that's sometimes hard for teams to grapple with and to measure. So we're really excited to have built this data over time to actually understand for teams that are focusing on their release process and improvements there, what they stand to gain. So first part, brief look at some of the highlights, key findings from that report, setting the stage for discussion with some special guests. We'll be introducing them shortly. Really exciting, some senior mobile leaders who have done this before and have some experience actually working on release management for mobile at some scale as well. Finally, after discussion with them, we'll try to leave some time for Q&A. Along the way as well, please feel free to leave any questions in the chat and we can try to get to them as we go. Perfect. So first part, the mobile release management ROI report that we put together. Why did we even bother? Why is this important? We really wanted to answer this question that we at Runway have always had a sense of the answer to, but haven't always been able to put numbers to. We understand, coming from the mobile world and now working with so many different teams, there is a lot of complexity in mobile releases that has a domino effect across your entire sort of team and org and process. There's a lot more wasted time and effort spent on releases than a lot of teams realize. That creates a real cost to the business. It's something you should care about, but it's often not prioritized. It's not looked at closely. Some of the problem there, we think, is that this is a new area to focus on. There's not a lot of data. There is this sense that releases could be better, but without sort of data and hard evidence behind it, it's sometimes hard for teams to prioritize focusing on improving their mobile release process. Mobile release management as a concept, we've tried to define it. It's something new. And that means, again, that teams have not been looking at a macro level of the domain and what can be done, what should be prioritized. So we are now in a position at Runway to actually try to get at some of the numbers behind this. What happens as teams over time decide to prioritize release management, decide to improve their processes around releases, watch a team over time and see the impact, see the benefits of actually focusing on this as a priority. So the highlights of the report we're going to look at briefly here to paint a picture of where it's coming from and how we actually put it together. This is data coming from tens of thousands of real releases over, I'd say, a couple of years at least. Many different kinds of mobile teams are represented. You have different sizes of teams shipping apps in different verticals, teams across the world in different geos, multiple platforms, of course, iOS, Android, some folks shipping to stores other than just App Store Connect or the App Store and Play Store. So a variety of teams represented. And we also spend part of the report or focused a little bit on comparing teams that are focusing on release management to the broader world in the app stores. So some clever sort of data we've tried to collect, scraping and interpreting from the app stores and comparing to teams who have onboarded and been releasing with Runway. So getting into the data, trying to capture some key highlights. What do you stand to gain? What can your team actually achieve if you focus on release management? The first chart here is looking at time spent in releases. Pretty straightforward. A little bit of color in case it's helpful or interesting. What's actually represented here? The y-axis is this sort of normalized multiple, we call it, understanding that there are a number of teams represented here and a wide range of ways of releasing and normal sort of values for a given team. We need to normalize that to be able to compare trends. So the y-axis on all the charts here is looking at a delta from an average for a team. So relative to their average over the period, is this release trending above or below for a given metric? So that's what's being compared on the y-axis there. X-axis is time. So as teams have spent more time working with us and releasing with Runway, this is an evolution of these metrics. So the first one here, time spent in releases, we found that teams from starting with us over time are ending up spending about a fifth, 20% less time in releases. Obviously, a lot of benefit there. Your team, as long as you have a release in cycle, there is attention being paid there. There's the extra mental load and also actual tasks being done for the release. If you can shorten the actual duration of your release cycles, you're earning time back to spend on your product, to spend on sort of core activities. In cases where maybe you have platform folks or senior folks that are tending to releases, that's really valuable time that's unlocked for other initiatives. Time to recovery is another really important one. We have found that over time, teams are able to cut their time to recovery from unhealthy releases by 32%. That means not just you're shipping hot fixes quicker, but these improvements are also coming from attention paid to other parts of your release cycle, like monitoring and running rollouts. If you do staged rollouts, it means not just the ability to release quicker, but also the ability to catch issues with releases more quickly, to triage more quickly, and then of course start spinning up a hotfix. Another key stat here, a little more on the product side and looking at how your team is actually delivering value to users. Teams over time with a focus on release management are cutting their product lead time, is essentially what this is measuring, by about 14%. So it's not just a matter of your releases are speeding up themselves, but if you think about how product actually gets built and shipped at your org, this is spanning multiple releases, right? And so what we're measuring is across all the work that's shipping with any given release, we look at the code, we see related project management tickets, and we see when those tickets were first created, the product conception point. Measuring that time and seeing it decrease is actually quite powerful. This is across sprints, this is across releases, this is affecting your whole product roadmap, right? The ability for product to actually get changes, new features, fixes out to users. Another metric here has to do with on-time releases and predictability around releases. That's important, again, across the team. It's not just about being more efficient in releases, getting them out sooner. You also want the wider org to know when things are shipping and to make that predictable and easily understandable across the team. We have found over time that teams focusing on mobile release management are kicking off on time almost 30% more often. Think about the domino effect that comes with this, right? Every time you're missing a release kickoff or a deadline to cut a release, you have this snowball effect. Folks are more likely to come and try to squeeze more work into the release, further delaying it. You have these sort of missteps or misalignment across teams when you're expecting to ship a given thing to users. And there's also a lot of sort of jeopardy for upcoming releases, delays that end up happening after the one release that has been delayed. Another topic that we look at a lot is how teams operate their release trains, if you're on a train model, or how you safeguard the diff, the changes that you're shipping with each release. Again, important because there is this correlation between release size, release diffs, late arriving changes, and quality. It can affect the quality of what you ship, either that, or it means you're having a lot of last minute scrambles. You're asking a lot of QA or engineers, if you're doing your own QA, to make sure that late changes have been fully validated. And when you integrate it all, that you are actually validating a new RC and putting it through its paces. So a lot of reasons why you want to safeguard your diffs quite religiously. And so we have found over time that teams focusing on the release management, focusing on this part of the process, are able to reduce late arriving commits. That's commits that are landing post kickoff, post cut, by 16%. So again, bringing that down is safeguarding app quality, but also saving the team from the stress and the scramble that comes with dealing with these late changes. And then the last highlight here has to do with this comparison. We're looking at teams that have been focusing on release management, comparing that to teams across the App Store charts. So top teams, presumably teams that are operating at some kind of level. We have found in a number of areas that teams that have been focusing on their release management with us are performing better than what we can discern from version history and trends in the app stores. So you can see release frequency, the cadence of releases for our cohort compared to other top 20 apps in the charts is almost 30% higher. Time to recovery, 10% quicker. And the last one there, the number of hotfixes that are being shipped. So the measure of release failure rate, change failure rate is almost a quarter lower compared to even top charting apps. So I think all of that sort of goes to show you can be a mature, high-performing team that still has a lot to gain if you choose to focus in on release management. There's some real upside here. Cool. I said it would be brief. It was. Right after this, when we transition, I'll share a copy of the ROI doc that we have for you in the handout section, so you can take a look in a bit more detail. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce our guests. We have Andra Georgescu, Principal Android Engineer at Skyscanner, Caleb Hermes from SoFi, Staff Software Engineer there, and our very own Matt Varghese. He is one of Runway's other founders, and he will be joining me in moderating the discussion. Welcome, Andra. Welcome, Caleb. Welcome, of course, Matt.
Hello.
So to kick us off, we're going to start very high level with an opening question. We want to understand the before and after for both of you. So I'll start with you, Andra. Opening question, can you describe what your release process at Skyscanner looked like before you chose to focus in on release management as a discipline, and what things maybe started to look like after?
Yes, of course. Matt, do you mind muting yourself, please? Thank you. So for Skyscanner, we actually had, let's say, quite a mature release management process. Too mature, I'd say. It was legacy at that point, where it was built back in 2016 when the whole craze around release management, release trains started to cover. There were no, let's say, third-party tools out there to help support that for big companies that wanted to implement that. So Skyscanner set off to build their own. We had an in-house tool called SkyTrain. It was built, like I said, 9 years ago, using technologies and frameworks that we no longer support now as production standards. And it went halfway to automation, where it was half automated in terms of like sending out reminders or uploading builds to the Play Store, or let's say like connecting to Slack, that sort of stuff. But there was still quite a lot of manual process and quite a lot of mental loads being put on release managers. We ran a bi-weekly release train. With each week, we would alternate platforms being released, and each platform being released would require a release manager that had knowledge of said platform. Whenever there is anything manual, there is always the risk of human error. So therefore, the mental load sometimes would lead to, let's say, someone forgetting to upload on a specific release day, and then we would delay by a day, a release window, and so on and so forth. Because over time, the people who had built the tool left, so the business knowledge was lost, the implementation knowledge was lost. We were at this point of maintaining something we didn't really know much about, and even something like upgrading Python libraries so that we are not stuck with security risks were quite a lot of toil and effort. So that was our before. We still had a release management process in place and a tool that we were using. However, we wanted to take it further. So that's our before.
Pretty cool. I've always thought for Skyscanner. So maybe before we transition into the after, and a lot of the discussion is going to be about the after. Anyway, Caleb, what did the before look like at SoFi?
Yeah. So at SoFi, we were the opposite. We had no release management process at all. There were a couple of like haphazard wiki documents and people's permissions were scattered. The only portion we really had automated was like the actual build cut. But from there, people were uploading binaries and managing like the state of the release throughout the week. And then obviously, if there were hot fixes, that was a whole big kerfuffle. We had a spreadsheet for like hotfix requests, and we would have hotfix requests with a high frequency, and that all had to be managed by hand, right? And then we have like a whole suite of regression tests, and that was a separate document that also had to be orchestrated. And then kind of like one of the biggest pain points was we have a high number of business units at SoFi. We do a lot. And so everybody would want to know, where's the release at? How are we doing? And so someone was always fielding questions constantly, having to look up stuff for, God forbid, somebody was out who was trying to run the release for that week, because then someone else would have to take over and completely context switch, and it would basically halt their entire work week. So yeah, that we finally identified like the need for a real release management practice, and things have been a lot better since we actually implemented one.
Perfect. So then paint a bit of the picture, maybe starting with you, Kayla, this time, about what the evolution looked like when you started focusing on this as an area you all wanted to improve. What did that transition look like, and what have you seen so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the process of identifying like a new mobile release management process, we had a few pain points we really wanted to nail down. We wanted to get rid of all of our spreadsheets. We wanted it to be very transparent to anyone who wanted to know where the release was in its process. And we also really wanted to move to a phased rollout release process. Before our transition, the build got signed off by every business unit, all the regression tests were passing, everything looked good, and we would slam that guy 100% to both app stores, which can be pretty risky, right? And so that was another key factor that we wanted to be able to enable. But then also, like, that goes back into the like transparency with business units, right? We want to be able to point to something and say, this release is at 50%. You can expect 50% of the customers for this business unit's feature to be able to use it, and the rest will be at 100% in X days. And you can see that. And now that we have a full process in place, that transparency is 100% there and self-serviceable by anybody within our organization, from engineers working on the app all the way up to the CEO. We also have significantly reduced the number of hot fixes that come in because, again, that transparency about when the build is being cut, when you need to expect to have your code merged into our main branch, and when that is going to release, and what the impact is. Okay, say some feature developer wasn't able to get their feature on time. They, again, with that transparency, they know, okay, I missed this one. The next release that it's going to be in is going to be in X days. I can communicate that upwards and calm everybody from there.
I'm curious, the one small point there, the reason why, it sounds like one of the reasons why you weren't doing stage rollouts before was because it was creating confusion, or it was opaque to the wider business as to if something was rolling out, why isn't this in this cohort's hands yet? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. That was a huge reason that we had never done any phased rollouts. And now we're on a full 10-day phased rollout cycle with every release. And you had mentioned there was a question, or one of your slides was around how quickly teams recover from incidents. And so again, if we were at this 100% release, if we rolled that out, it's like immediately everybody's got this terrible big bad bug. We had a bug that we were able to catch because we were at 1% of users, and some 400 Android users had adopted the version. We were able to identify that there was a problem, halt release, get a hot fix in, and have it rolling out the next day. And those 400 users, of course, had a bad experience, but on the scale, SoFi, that's minuscule, right? Sub 0.01%. That was a huge win for us.
Awesome. Same question for you, Andra. What did the next stage and the current stage, what do they look like?
For Skyscanner, we had a few goals that we wanted to achieve when we started focusing on release management. The main one was being able to move to weekly releases. With our previous tooling, it just wasn't feasible. It took way too long. It took a lot of manual involvement, about 1 day a week, just like continuous involvement from the release manager for each platform. So we wanted to achieve weekly releases through adopting more automation. So another goal was to cut down on the manual process. So finding a tool that would introduce as much automation as possible, even to the point of not even having to open the Google Play console or the equivalent for iOS was really important for us. And another associated goal was for us to lose the security risk and just the risk in general associated with a single point of failure that our previous tool presented. And through keeping all of this in mind, we were able to compare the solutions on the market. Runway was one of them, and we chose to go with you guys in the end. We're happy to say that we've addressed all of those concerns, and we've hit all of those goals. We are now on a weekly release schedule. The 1 day a week per release management per platform was cut down to a matter of perhaps an hour, let's say. But not only that, because we're basically doing both platforms at the same time, we've basically managed to save about 2 days a week. That can now be given back to the enablement team, who is still managing releases, and we still have release managers, but it's now just one manager, and regardless of which platform they have expertise on. So there are quite a lot of benefits coming out of focusing our efforts on improving our release management.
Can you hear me? Okay, awesome. So how have you been able to quantify the engineering hours saved since streamlining your releases, and how has that reduction affected your team's ability to kind of go back and focus on core product work?
We were averaging probably about 2.5 days a week of engineering time, like just managing the release, managing hot fixes, dealing with spreadsheets, like I mentioned, across all of our regression testing, and then fielding questions. That has been cut down to now maybe like an hour a week on like everything's fine, no hot fixes week. I'm a part of the mobile core team at SoFi, and this subgroup manages the release. If anyone does bring us a hot fix, it's usually a matter of merging their merge request into the release branch that was previously cut, and then recutting that branch. And then from there, we have an automated process that builds the binaries, uploads the binaries, and then using Runway, everything else is hands off from there. The regression tests are executed, and are marked in our release management tool. Business unit product owners sign off on releases, and assuming everything is green and everything looks good, it automatically gets submitted to the store and released. And then as the apps roll out, if anything terrible or scary happens, we've got automation in place that will pause those rollouts so that we can examine anything that may have potentially gone wrong and fix them, or maybe it's a false flag and we let it keep going. Super cut back on the amount of manual effort, which again allows the engineers on the mobile core team to continue building out like the platform style work that we do for enabling the rest of SoFi's mobile engineers to do the good work that they do.
In our case, like I've already mentioned, we're saving about 2 days per week, let's say on average, compared to our previous way of doing releases, coming from the time that we're saving our release managers. So they are freed up about 2 days per week to go actually do enablement work as part of the enablement team that they're in. However, through improving our release management process, like I said, we've managed to move to weekly releases, which in and of itself brings quite a lot of productivity gains when you're thinking about the ability to experiment more often. So our product teams don't have to wait or rush, let's say, to make a release window, a code freeze window, in order to get their feature out, because they need to experiment, because that's what's on their timelines. So now, rather than telling them, oh, you have to wait 2 weeks, you have to wait 1 week, and that somehow just seems more manageable overall. And we are seeing quite a lot more experiments taking place over, let's say, the same window of time than we used to before.
Awesome. That's very cool. Another area, and we touched on it a bit, that we wanted to talk about or focus on has to do with quality and recovery from issues. You were mentioning a bit, Caleb, about sort of hot fixes and that being quicker. I'm curious if there's more that either of you would share on time to recovery, and also maybe aspects of, I guess, the before of issues surfacing, higher quality because of improved release processes, and then maybe also the ability to better catch issues as they develop. Anything you'd share there?
Yeah, so not to keep harking on this point, but we have metrics in place, instrumentation throughout our app to try and catch things like app not responding, terrible crashes, and things like that. But the biggest advantage we've had with this mobile release process that we've gone through is this phased rollout, right? And before we would release the app and then usually very quickly start getting alarms and alerts because things would be broken. And so assuming there was a problem. And then it would be like an all hands on deck. What's the problem? We need to fix forward and fix forward fast. And then that has its whole own bevy of issues where you're trying to get the release out fast because maybe people aren't able to log in, right? Like worst case scenario. And because you're trying to fix fast, you could potentially introduce new issues. And that's something that has happened to us in the past. And now that we're on like this phased rollout strategy with our current implementation, we find these issues way earlier on way smaller sets of people. And it's not a drop everything and fix it. We identify the issue, the team or like owners of that particular area of the code base will get a fix in, we'll get it released, and things just continue on as normal. And it's way less of an emergency, which is way less stressful to engineers and allows for a smoother ride for everybody.
For us, the gains that we've seen have partly to do with, like, for example, when we have to do a hot fix, there used to be quite a lot of manual process required from release managers, sometimes on like really good periods of time when we wouldn't see the need for a hot fix for maybe a few months at a time. People would just, by not doing it, would forget how to do it. So they would have to go and reread through the process and make sure that we're doing it right. Whereas now that it's all automated, it's as simple as clicking a button. So we are seeing some, again, time gains there, but also perhaps a bit more like we're trusting the process a bit more because it's no longer a matter of, am I remembering this correctly? We've also seen an improvement in or a decrease in the number of RC fixes. So we have this concept of a hot fix is something that you do after a release has gone live, but an RC fix is something that you do between the time you've cut a release candidate to send that out for manual testing, smoke testing, whatever, and then the time between that and actually going live. And because we used to have a couple of days of allowing people to do RC tests, and with the pressure of having to get features in because you'd have to wait a couple of weeks before your next shot at it, we had quite a lot of dubious RC fixes, let's say. Is this really a fix that is needed, or is it just you trying to rush a change in? And through the rushed, let's say, approach, we would perhaps rush stuff that is not as high quality or as well tested as it should be. We've removed the opportunity for people to do that, but also giving them a better alternative, which is you have to wait a few more days. It's fine. It's not, just do your proper testing, do your proper due diligence, and then take the next train, which is half the time that you had to wait before.
It makes a lot of sense. That ties back to the sort of late arriving changes, the impact of those. And it's very cultural, making people comfortable with this idea that you don't need to squeeze it in just now. It's going to go out soon enough, and you just apply very clear-cut rules around it that can help avoid some of the bargaining or the wrangling. So that makes a lot of sense. Last question for me on this topic. Anything business level around quality and recovery from issues, sort of KPIs or metrics that the wider business was looking at?
We're necessarily looking at KPIs around this, but we are also now able, whenever we have, let's say, complaints from our travelers, we're able to give them a more acceptable solution, which is just wait for the next release, which is likely to come in a week or less from the moment you're asking for it. So our customer services team are better equipped to deal with traveler complaints.
Anything on your, yeah, go ahead, Caleb.
Yeah, sorry. So on my side, it's kind of a similar deal. And I don't know that we've captured any KPI specific metrics, but by having, again, by using Runway and having this transparency across the entire organization, there is less need, like, say there's an incident and our money team is trying to figure out when a feature may have rolled out a release 6 releases ago. That would previously would have required someone from the mobile core team to get on a call and do a bunch of digging and diff logging and all of those things. And now that information is self-service to product owners, potentially like people who never touch the code, because there's a really lovely Jira integration, right? So they can go right from one to the other and can see when a bug may have potentially been introduced. And I have heard that from non-technical members of our organization, that has been like a 2 thumbs up benefit from their side.
Digging a little bit further into kind of the user facing side of things, so some of what we just looked at, we see a 14% reduction in product lead time once you've spent that time working on better release management. Andra, can start with you. How has this affected your product roadmap actually, and then your ability to respond to market changes, and then even like user metrics beyond that?
Back to how moving to weekly releases has helped us on that front. We are able to experiment more often. So we're fitting more experimentation within a similar sized window of time, which obviously makes product happier. They're able to, let's say, focus on ideation rather than trying to do like project management, delivery management type stuff. We've seen some benefits in terms of communication with our product function. So just somehow moving from 2 weeks to 1 week cadence, but also moving from, let's say, Thursday being your release cut day to Monday being your release cut day, somehow aligns much better with not just non-technical, just people in general, with the way they see time. So it's easier to communicate over timelines, and also not having to try to do the math of, well, if I get my feature in on this Thursday, then it's likely that it's going to be 100% on users' phones in 20 days or however long. That I can't remember. There's like complicated maths going on there. So we've seen quite an improvement in our ability to communicate between technical and non-technical people and communicate timelines usually.
This one's a little trickier on the SoFi side. Like I said earlier, I'm a member of SoFi's mobile core team. So the mobile core team, we don't actually build any particular features. We do more like platform and low-level work to enable other teams to build these features. And so I can't say that I've heard anything specific from members of our business unit or product owners about reducing those timescales, though I'm sure if I asked, I could probably dig a story or two out of somebody.
There aren't answers or correct answers to all these questions. Another theme has a bit to do with predictability. And again, a lot of these themes I think we've touched on along the way. Don't need you to repeat yourselves, but curious, having focused in on mobile release management, this idea of, again, it's these themes of keeping people on the same page, for stakeholders to understand correctly, I guess, like when to expect certain things to land or ship or whatever it might be. Tell us a bit about, anything more around predictability and maybe outcomes of having more predictable, more on time releases.
Yeah, so I'll start with this one if that's okay. So we typically will cut a release on Tuesday and then take a few days to let business units and like our QA team make sure that everything's up to snuff, and we'll start a rollout on Friday. We'll do a real slow over the weekend and then ramp it out throughout the following week. And that's our best case scenario. That's what we've been really working towards. In the before times, we would typically cut on, I think, a Wednesday and then start to try and roll it out on a Friday, and we'd go like straight to 100%. But then if there was like a hot fix necessary, or earlier we talked about like pre-release candidate issues, we call them at SoFi, we call them showstoppers. If there was a showstopper that would throw a whole wrench in the game, and we had seen releases where someone would implement a fix for a showstopper, and then that would have to go back through the regression process because maybe that fix came in like real late on a Thursday. And so now you kind of want to make sure that's all sane. And then maybe there was a problem with the fix. So then now it's like we're almost on the way back to Tuesday again. We still haven't even released, and we're trying to cut again, and we weren't on a phased rollout. And so you could see the release sometimes get delayed by days. And then you're in this like no man's land where do we start and release it and then cut when we should have cut 2 days ago and try and catch up, or do we just wait? And now business units are confused about timelines and stakeholders are upset, and essentially all of that has gone away.
In our case, I think we are a bit more predictable in the sense that by automating things and not relying so much on manual process, like I said, you don't expose yourself to the risk of human error or like forgetting to push a button and then your release doesn't go to market on a Tuesday when it's scheduled, it goes on a Wednesday, etc. But we are definitely seeing more consistency. Our process was predictable, but we are now being more consistent with delivering on that predictability. I think, what else can I say on this? Oh, yes, we have also sort of predictability, let's say, around onboarding people. So let's say new hires to our enablement team. It's way easier now and way more predictable that they will be quickly onboarded onto release management, whereas before they would require handholding for a couple of releases just to make sure that they're learning from a seasoned release manager who's been doing the manual process for a while. It's now a matter of even the documentation in and of itself is way lighter, as in the stuff that actually has to sit in Confluence around this is how you do release management. A lot of it is just because we're using Runway. So Runway, the tool itself, is very well like designed as a user experience. So there's no real need for much documentation. And yeah, we've had, I think, a couple of engineers whom we've onboarded since we've adopted Runway as a tool. And it's been, I think, a smoother onboarding experience when it comes to release management than it was when I was doing it a couple of years ago.
Yeah, piggybacking off that, but it was the same deal. So when I started with SoFi, like your on-call week was always looked at with this terrible dread. Oh, you're going to be on call, good luck. And then, of course, whenever we onboarded someone, not only did it eat their week, but someone had to basically babysit them and make sure that they didn't forget anything and that everything got hit the right way and in the right order. And that's all completely gone now. Runway manages a ton of it. It's super obvious what to do and what the next steps are. And for those like few edge cases, we've got like a single half pager that kind of walks you through what you need to do in case something like goes terribly wrong. So the mental load, much smaller.
That's great to hear. It's a great way to measure it is how long your run books are or docs around this, and hopefully shortening is. Yeah, back in my time, had some gnarly spreadsheets, and they would change every 6 months. You'd have a new person come in and decide to rethink how things are done. So there's always need to retrain, even if you're not a new hire. But yeah, good stuff.
Quick last note there, when we were starting Runway, a lot of the early research we did was actually getting examples of people's run books. We had folders full of Google spreadsheets and Excel charts, and yeah, just seeing not only like the chaos, how different it was across the board was super informative.
There were many flow charts in there as well, which seems crazy, but teams would put together flow charts of their process, which you would hope wouldn't be required.
Next up, so once you've spent some time streamlining, like getting all the benefits that we've talked about, it kind of changes what you can do with resources on your team, like even from an org level. I'm curious, and we can start with you, Andra. Has it like affected how you've been able to structure your teams, or more specifically responsibilities around releases? And I know we've touched on this here and there, but any more to say about that?
Structuring teams, not necessarily. We still have the same enablement team who still owns the release management process. So the Runway integration, but also doing the release management, even though it's way more lightweight nowadays. And our enablement team is, let's say, a reactive kind of team. So their capacity partly gets given to long-running priorities or projects that they want to, let's say, improve processes, such as the release management one. But they also have to enable and support whenever something happens, they have to be reactive. And in the past, product teams would perhaps be less happy about the responsiveness of the enablement team. And I think through giving some of this time back to the people in the team, they've been able to better support the product teams. However, we are seeing a bit more time being taken away from product teams, at least right now, when it comes to doubling on the amount of testing, manual testing that they have to do, because we've moved to double the speed. So every week now, everybody has to run the test suites that they own. But this has started, let's say, a healthy conversation around perhaps we should automate more. If you're unhappy about this, then it's not the fact that we've moved to weekly releases is not a cause of your dissatisfaction. It's just, let's say, something that's uncovered a problem that already existed, which is we are doing a bit too much manual testing. So let's focus on solving that problem at its root.
Hey, I dropped there for a second, but I think I've got context for the question. As I mentioned before, as part of the mobile core team, we build out infrastructure and platform and tooling for the rest of the mobile org. And since we've implemented a new mobile release management platform, it has super unlocked our team's capacity. We have been able to undertake some like long running multi-quarter sized efforts that may have been like year-long efforts in the past based on the capacity we were previously working with. And so that has been incredible. The team, I think, has been really happy with the amount of like actual dedicated time we have now towards additional work that previously was being eaten up by this release management, our old release management process. And similarly, we had the same discovery where once we got to this process, we were like, wow, we really are running maybe too many manual test cases, and have cut down on that by roughly 20% in terms of moving them to additional automated testing in addition to what we had before we started. So that's been great. And that effort obviously is basically, will never stop, but we get closer and closer to zero every day.
Yeah. A lot of these things are never-ending exercises, but moving in the right direction. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. It raises an interesting point of often we talk a lot with teams about they want to release faster and getting them there without the penalty of there's only so much you automate and there's only so much that you can streamline. But of course, if you're releasing twice as often, there are some things that are happening twice as often. So it's this little catch-22, but usually worth it on the whole. Great. Zooming out again, and I think again, we've touched on some of this, but maybe very specifically on developer experience, which we didn't really talk about, at least by name, morale and happiness on a team. You mentioned the on-call dread, that sort of thing. Any discussion around the impact on that sort of area for folks on the team? Maybe not even just people who are having to run releases, stakeholders having maybe better access to information they need, other folks around the team that might be impacted by changes here. Any more qualitative understanding of improvements and sentiment towards releases?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have some numbers here somewhere about that. So I just found them. So once a year, we've done it twice now. The director of the mobile organization puts out like this survey to all of the mobile developers, and he really hounds to make sure everybody gets through it. And there was a whole section about releases. And so to just read you these specific numbers, we saw a 14% increase in positive responses to the question, the mobile release process is easy to understand, and an 18% increase in the question, I know where to find information and updates on mobile releases. So those are like hard numbers from a survey that we ran before a new release management process was put into place and after. And both of those trend in like the upper 80s now, where before they were quite a bit lower. Like I said, that's across all engineers, mobile engineers at SoFi, not just the mobile core team. So it's not just the people managing the releases that are feeling the benefits of having a new process in place.
That's super cool. Thanks for sharing and having that handy. A tangent question, like these sort of surveys, I think they evoke different feelings. They can be hard to get folks to respond to, that kind of thing. Any tips for folks or what you've seen like work, I should say, running these surveys?
Yeah. So SoFi's mobile engineering org is like roughly 80 people. And so when you have that kind of small subset, it's easier to specifically hound people who haven't responded and say, hey, do this thing, please. It takes 5 minutes. Because it's like pulling fingernails to get people to do any kind of this stuff. I can't imagine trying to do it on an org much, much bigger than that. So not a ton of helpful advice, but.
Yeah, just hounding people, it sounds like.
Yeah.
In our case, I don't have concrete numbers like Caleb, but just from talking to people, obviously, like I said, the release managers are the happiest out of the whole situation because they have to hold less mental load. They have to do less work around it, but they also get hounded way less or asked the sort of question, when is this release going out? Or I don't know, what are we waiting for? You just go and you open the centralized platform and everybody has access to it as well. So they are standing to gain quite a lot out of all of this. From the product engineering side of things, I'm also witnessing people have a lot less stress around code freezes. So it's just overall, it's not like they want to rush changes into a code freeze. It's almost like they were feeling pressured to do so, just so that they wouldn't have to give bad news to product. So now they're feeling a lot less of that pressure, which overall should lead to, say, better mental health at work. But that's counterbalanced, like I said, with their disappointment around having to do more manual testing. But again, it's driving healthy conversations there.
Cool. Okay, like a closing question from me. This is for Caleb to start, and this is a nice big softball given everything that we've been talking about so far. But if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself about implementing a more mature mobile release process?
Yeah, this one's easy. Just do it sooner, right? The gains, the benefits that we've seen, the reduction in stress, the reduction in like constant drop what I'm doing to answer some stakeholder's question. We should have done it 6 months earlier. Yeah. So that's figure out what you want, right? Identify your biggest pain points and then get to it. And collect numbers, because it's easier when you're done to have metrics and say, look at all this time we saved for the people who have to pay for it.
I'll piggyback on the collect numbers along the way, because we haven't done so. So I don't have those numbers that you do, Caleb, to answer to these questions. And also to piggyback on the do it sooner. In our case, I'd say, because we did do it as early as 2016. And yes, back then there wasn't a choice to go on the market and purchase a solution. But I would say don't let it get so out of hand to the point where it becomes such a big risk. Invest sooner in improving things rather than, don't think about it. It works. So therefore, it's not worth the investment. It is worth the investment. And also, I'd say focus on, once you know that, let's say our goal was to move to weekly releases, we focus too much on delivering on the goal and perhaps not so much on, once we get there, do we have the automation in place, the testing automation in place to be able to support that properly, rather than have to, again, react to the change. We could have perhaps invested a bit earlier, but yeah.
Awesome. Both great responses. And yeah, hindsight's 2020 or whatever they say. There's always stuff to keep on the radar, but it's really interesting to hear the different perspectives having come from different sort of starting places in a way. And yeah, really appreciate all the responses throughout. I will just call out, I added the ROI report to the handout section if folks want to grab from there. We'll also be sending that around and sharing that, as well as a recording if you'd like to share that or watch it back with your team. So with that, I would just like to thank both Andra and Caleb so much for joining, for all the insightful answers. Really great to hear about the journeys and the thought that's gone into this on the part of your teams. And thank you, Matt, for co-hosting. Thank you all for joining. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Feel free to reach out with any questions that do come up along the way.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. Have a good rest of your days, wherever in the world you are. See you around later.